Relationship with the U.S. has changed. I've been clear about that, for months. It has bigger ramifications than just the U.S. The way the global economy is working is changing. We need to change. Working with President Trump, working with his team as possible, sovereign nation to sovereign nation.
Work with us on economic issues, work with us on the friendships and the relationships that we have on a personal basis around the world, and work with us on security issues so that we can deliver for the people that own our countries.
We started there with Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking earlier this week exclusively with CTV News on his working relationship with U.S. President Donald Trump. Also today, we had the American ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, and he was in Ottawa suggesting room for collaboration. That's the messaging. But how likely is it that it'll play out in political practice? Well, let's bring in our front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's now senior advisor at Spark Advocacy and North Star Public Affairs. Larissa Waller is the founder of Henley Strategies. She is the former head of communications for Ontario's Conservative Premier Doug Ford, and former Ontario NDP MPP Gurjit Singh. He is now the vice president at Crestview Strategy. He's also the brother of former federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Welcome to Friday, all. Thanks so much for being here. Sabrina, I want to talk to you first about the sort of incongruity here of messages. When we hear what's coming from U.S. President Donald Trump and what he wants on tariffs, and then you have the U.S. ambassador to Canada saying, hey, work with us, and even Nikki Haley, the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, saying, don't worry, this too shall pass. What do you think that politicians on this side of the border are thinking, and how should they approach this now?
I think it's no different than the incongruity of messages we've seen since Trump era #1, right? Trump is always the only person that knows what's going on inside his mind. That's why it's important to approach dealing with Mr. Trump and dealing with the United States as not status quo. So you can't really take what somebody like Pete Hoekstra or Nikki Haley or Howard Lutnick says at face value, because 10 minutes after they say it, president could change his mind, put out an executive order, and things are different. So I think it's important for Canadian officials, ministers, bureaucrats, Mr. Carney, to take what other representatives of the U.S. government are saying with a grain of salt, absorb it, use it maybe as information, but not use it as gospel. And I think that Mr. Carney's done that. And I think that what we saw last week when he did have that opening relationship and opening meeting with Donald Trump is he managed to set the tone, and it was a positive tone, at least to start. I think Pete Hoekstra also said in a Politico interview that it sounds like Donald Trump might like Mark Carney because he's a business guy and it seems like he can do a business deal. And so I think that that's really the important, message that we need to take when we deal with the United States now. It's almost like, do the vibes align with Donald Trump in that moment of time when you're negotiating? And if the vibes align, you might get what you want.
Yeah, you keep saying, do the vibes align, and I'm worried about a vibe session and that happening again, but let's not go there, Larissa. What do you think about how Canadian politicians should be going with this? It almost feels like it's a keep calm, carry on, see what the message is from day to day, but try and trust the process almost.
That's my brother's favorite saying, trust the process. So maybe smile. Listen, what I've seen from Mark Carney over the last few days harkens back to what we've seen from Doug Ford for a long time. You have to find a way to criticize the policy and sometimes even the erratic nature of Donald Trump, keeping in mind he is going to be the president for the next 3.5 years. We are never going to change geography, and the U.S. is always going to be our #1 trading partner. So I get that during an election, people are a little spicier. And you know what? Even Donald Trump said that. But the reality is we have to find a way through this. We will never be able to replace the market share with a patchwork of other countries. It's just not a reasonable expectation. The better expectation is muddle through the next 4 years. God willing, there will be a new president. God willing, it won't be J.D. Vance. And we'll move forward after that.
Gurjit, what do you think about how the government needs to sort of plot out the next couple of months and even heading into the G7. I mean, when we were talking to Candace Lang there, the chair of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, they were essentially trying to say that, look, we have to try and keep this on the rails as we go forward, even though, as I had said, the call is basically coming from inside the House.
I would say it's a lesson in continually hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. Given the erratic nature of Trump, we know that his policy can change at any moment. He thinks that his erratic nature, the chaos he brings forward, is actually a positive factor in his negotiation. So it's something that he really leans into. So as the prime minister or as the Liberal government needs to really look at this situation and say, this is something that is, it seems like right now there's a positive step that's coming forward. There's been a positive development in the relationship between Canada and America. We're seeing a step back away from the 51st state language and all this kind of language around taking away our sovereignty. But that could come back, given however the machinations and thought processes of Trump are. So I would say continually we need to make sure that we are doing as best as we can. The Prime Minister should do as best he can to maintain that strong relationship with the U.S., given our proximity, given to how close our markets are already intertwined. But I think the fact that the way he started off when he first became Prime Minister, that trip to the UK, to France, looking to Europe, digging into his own credentials as someone with deep connections in the UK and Europe, I think that's smart. We need to diversify and be ready that if Trump decides to try to turn off those taps again or continue and escalate the trade war that he's already engaged with, that we have other measures to look.
I mean, I take your point, Guterton, but Sabrina, the fact is, as Larissa said, you're not going to change geography. You can't change overnight the fact that we are their biggest customer, even though Mark Carney has said he wants all internal trade barriers gone by July 1st. And he's also talked about, these big nation building projects. Well, I mean, I think everybody understands that doesn't happen within 2, 3, even 4 years of a Trump presidency. So is there anything that this government can do in the interim or really in the near term to try and protect itself against the trade war as we're going forward, even as we're going into that first ministers meeting at the beginning of June?
So I do think what Groton mentioned about Canada opening up those outside of the United States trade alliances or trade routes is really important. And I think that that's something that Mark Carney has a particular strength in. And I think that that is a near-term interim solution, right? To at least start exploring them and thinking about how to quickly accelerate some of those deals. I'd also say, if I was Canada and I was some of the department officials, I would watch closely in what happens in the United States going forward. There's a lot of things where Donald Trump is making outward changes, but he's making a lot of changes inside, and that's going to cause a lot of instability. When you think about the changes he's made in health, when you think about the changes he's made on different regulations, things are going to potentially start to fall apart in the United States. And I think that's an important signal to see, when things start to fall apart in the United States, how does he react and where does he shift blame? Where does he then start to, pull at strings to get wins back? So I think that's an important signal that Canadian officials have to keep watching on. It's only been, just over 100 days since the president's been elected, and you haven't seen the impacts necessarily on the American people of what's happened. But I think those impacts are coming, with the exception of the multiple stock crashes that I think were hugely detrimental to the United States. But as those things start to change and as domestic issues start to arise, that's when I think that Canada and Canadians have to be aware of where is he now going to start to try and make wins, and do those come back in trying to bully Canada again.
Larissa, you've got the last 30 seconds in this subject, but do you think that sits well with Canadians? Because you have to think that politicians will look at this on this side of the border and say, well, do I wait for that type of a thing to happen south of the border, or do I be more proactive?
I think we have to lean into the relationships and the things that we know are true and stable today, knowing that they can change tomorrow. But as long as there's people like Ambassador Huckstra, like their Trade Representative Greer, who are adults in the room, who understand the value of the relationship with Canada and who nurture those relationships, I think we have a path forward. But knowing that things can change on a dime.